Well, hey, good morning, Citylight. Good to see you guys. Grateful to be here with all of you. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Austin, and I'm one of the pastors here. Hey, this is the chicken wing that I ate last night, and that's just it. But it's not to tell you my diet last night. But who here? Raise your hand if you think this isn't sufficiently eaten. Raise your hand if you're like, there's more meat on that bone. Okay. Exactly. So there's some people, but raise your hand if you're like, this does represent how I would finish a chicken wing. Is there anybody in here that will just relate with me? Okay, thank you. I don't know. It's like I've been eating chicken wings with some of my friends, and it's like they think it's a crime. They're like you cannot, like I'll put this in like the scrap pile of the wings. Like, that's not done. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, there's a lot of meat left on that bone, and like they clean it like this. Like they clean it like there's nothing left. Like the grizzle, like everything. I'm like, I don't know. I think this is enough for me, And so it's a whole thing, right? But I think that this might be a good representation of how we read the Bible. Like, I think that many of us read it and we don't get all of it that we should. Like, we don't clean there's so much meat left on the bone, right? We don't get all that we're supposed to from it. And we just kind of we read it, we go, it's okay. Like, I tried to get something out of it. Didn't really get much out of it. I guess as we close it and come back to it tomorrow and we leave so much meat left on the bone. What if we read like this? Like, what if we took in everything that God intended us for through His Word? Like, I maybe if that's you, maybe it's because you don't have enough time. Maybe you're in a rush and you just don't have enough time to actually make that happen. Or maybe it's because of laziness. You're just thinking like, I don't want to put in the work to actually get everything off or out of the Bible that I should. Or maybe I think the primary reason is because we don't know how to. Like, we might not know how to actually read the Bible for all its richness and take all that meat off the proverbial bone, right? Does that make sense? So what I want to do just briefly this morning to start, before we go into Genesis 14, is to show you how I read the Bible and give you kind of a paradigm for the tool I use to actually internalize and get all that meat off the bones. Does that sound good? I adapted this from a book by David Helm on expositional preaching and reading and all that on Bible exposition. So here it is. I got 3 warnings and 3 movements, right? The first warning is, you can see this, I got a little chart for you guys that might help. So you think of the text you have right there, that's the passage that we're in. And then what we want to do is we want to read it and we go right to us now. And I'll call that impressionistic reading, right? So historically, for millennia, the way that people would paint, we get on this? Yep. The way that people would paint is that the paradigm is that you would look at something 10 times and then you would make one stroke on the painting, right, on the canvas. But then impressionistic painting came a thing, centuries ago, and it was this idea that you would leave it to impression. So you'd look at something one time and then you'd make 10 strokes on the canvas. And I think that's kind of symbolic of how a lot of us can read the Bible, where we look at it, we read the passage, and then we just give our first impression. I'll take one look at this, and then I'll make 10 applications in my life or 10 kind of conclusions from it. So that's impressionistic reading. We don't want to do that. That's why Philippians 4:13 is popular as it is, right? We put it on our cleats for sporting events. We read through it before we go into the job interview. Like, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And like, we think that's mainly an athletic or a job or success thing. That's not the context of that verse. So that's impressionistic. Don't do that. That's a warning. So the first movement then we want to do is go and what we'll call exegesis, right? And exegesis is just the study of the Bible, like learning what the Bible is saying. And so that's the arrow up, which is from the passage, we have to ask the question, what did this mean to them then? Understand that this book, the earliest, the closest to our day, the latest text in this is at least 2,000 years removed. So we're 2,000 years later than any single word that's been written. And so that means that there's so much here that we're going to miss. I mean, if you read something that's written 20 years ago, there's a little bit of a gap. Imagine 2,000 years. So we have to ask the question, what does this mean to them then? Yes, the Bible's written to all people at all times, but it also was penned by men through God in a specific space. So what did the author, what was their situation? Who were they writing it to? How would the early listeners actually internalize it and receive it first? So ask the question, what did it mean to them then? You might go, I don't know how to find that. That's also a work in and of itself. Again, if you don't have a study Bible, I think study Bibles are amazing. You can get a good one, ESV study Bible off Amazon for like $20. It's a great investment. Ask for it for your Valentine's Day gift from your significant other, or just buy it for yourself, or don't wait till Christmas. I don't know, do something, but figure out something to get that. Footnotes in your Bible are helpful. Blue Letter Bible is a great website resource you can go to. There's lots, but go and do something where you can actually do a little bit of work in your reading. What did this mean to them then? Even if you're asking the question, gosh, what would this have meant 2,000 years ago, or 4,000 or 6,000, or however long it would have been, right? So then here's the second warning. We do exegesis, we learn what it meant to them then, we learn what the Bible's teaching, and then we go straight to application to us now. And that would be the arrow kind of down from top left to bottom right. That's moralistic reading. So what we do, we read, we learn, we study, and then we just apply that right to our lives is kind of the next step. The reason that's not helpful is because I think it leads to big heads, busy hands, and burdened hearts. And so we got really big heads because we've studied the Bible, we've learned these cool things about it, and we got busy hands because we're applying, this is what I should do. This guy was courageous, I should be courageous. He gave some money, I should give some money. And then we just apply everything, but then we have these burdened hearts because we think the main impetus of the Bible is for God to call us to do more things. That's not going to be helpful for anybody. So that's not the main point, I think, of the Bible, is to get us to do stuff and be more moral. So you want to avoid that. That's the second warning. So then that leads to the second movement, which is from that top left to the top right, which is theological reflection. How does it point to Jesus? Now, I think if you're going to be at Citylight for any amount of time, and hopefully you've seen this and you will see this, but this idea of the gospel centrality, right? That everything points back to Jesus. Where does that come from? Two passages. One, in John chapter 5, verse 39, Jesus is talking to these Pharisees. They would school all of us on the Bible. They would look like we don't even know what the Bible is. That's how smart they were. That's how much they had studied it and read it. And Jesus goes, hey, you search the scriptures to find life, but they all point to me. He goes, dude, you know this so well. You're reading it. You've got all the exegesis right, but you're not taking it to the gospel. All this points to me. And then there's a passage in Luke 24. I think this is the most significant passage that has shaped my preaching, the way I see the Bible, and my reading of the Bible as well. In Luke 24, Jesus is resurrected. He's walking on the road to Emmaus. He meets these two disciples. They don't know who he is yet. He reveals himself. And it says that beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted all the scriptures that pointed to him. Could you imagine that? He goes, hey, Exodus, the lamb, you put the blood over like the Passover, that's me. Like, I'm the sacrificial lamb. I'm the blood you can hide under to escape death. Hey, the ark with Noah and stuff like that, I'm the better ark. You can hide in me and you get reserved from this. Hey, Leviticus and all those different, all the blood and all the sacrifices and everything for sin. Yeah, that's me. I'm the one And you just go, oh my gosh. So I'm convinced that every single page of this book points us to Jesus in some way. It's our job in that second movement to figure out, how does this point to Jesus? What would he teach me on the road to Emmaus of how this concerns him and points him? Does that make sense? And then here's the last warning, though, is sometimes when I first learned this, oh my gosh, the Bible points to Jesus, I started jumping to the gospel too quickly. So this would be from the bottom left to the top right, from read the passage to straight to Jesus. So here's what this looks like. We're reading, oh my gosh, there's a tree. Jesus died on a tree. Oh my gosh, you know what I mean? Oh, there's a lamb right here. Jesus, it was the lamb. Oh my gosh, someone bled. Jesus bled. And then we just jump to the gospel as quickly as I can. And maybe that is the connection, but often it's like you don't have to try to simplify this thing to make it connect to Jesus. It does in a really rich, beautiful way. You don't have to just make these big leaps at allegorization. It shows Jesus in some way, some aspect of his life, death, resurrection. And so I think it makes it that the warning is to go from the passage straight to Jesus. First, do the hard work of learning what the Bible is and the context and all that, and then move to that last reflection. And the last movement is application. Now that I've learned what does this mean to them then, how does it point to Jesus? Now I can jump down to what would this mean for me right now? How's it supposed to shape my thinking or my living or my doing or my feeling or all of that type of stuff? And then you move down to that space. Does that make sense? I'm telling you, you want to read your Bible like this, like you've got to ask those questions and do the hard work, right? Or if you don't, you're just going to leave this or more meat left on the bone. And it's like, I'm telling you, if you learn to get all the richness of the Bible out of it, what God intended, it will transform the way you see the Bible. which would transform the way you interact with God, which would transform your entire life. Does that make sense? So that's kind of my tool. That's free for this morning. So congratulations, you guys got that. But I hope you use it. I hope you walk in some way with that and it shapes it. Or maybe that's what you're already doing and it would encourage you to keep doing it. Now, I want to open up Genesis 14 and I'll show you. And once you know this, you'll start to see, hey, this is what he's doing. He's going from here to here, down to here, right? So we'll walk through that. Genesis 14. We got 3 movements of the text. The first part of the story is the rescue. I'm not going to read verses 1 through 16 because I don't want to be embarrassed, okay, in front of all you guys. I don't know how to pronounce these guys' names. And you know when you're reading the Bible by yourself, you're just kind of like, okay, that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. He beat that guy. He gave birth to that guy. Like the whole thing. Okay, so anyways, okay, the woman gave birth. He helped. I guess I got embarrassed. I didn't even read the name. So anyways, okay, but here's the thing. The rescue, right? This is the first part of the story. But look at verse 4. This is the significant verse in here. It said, 12 years they had served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled, right? Now, this is the very first war recorded in history, right here what we're reading. In verse 4, it just says that they had been paying this tribute, or they had been subject to them for all these years, and then they rebelled. Now, what would happen in this time was that conquering kings would come into cities and conquer them into submission. And when we think of conquering king, we think, everyone is a slave now, and we took all your possessions, plundered it, and we're going to burn your village. People realized, oh my gosh, actually we can get a lot more out of them if we just subject them to us. So hey, every 6 months, every year, we're going to come by and you're going to pay us a tribute. Think of it like taxes, right? And so rather than plundering everything and you're all slaves, you can keep your city, keep your job, keep your life, but we're going to come and you're going to give us some types of goods. Whether it's livestock or goods or metals or whatever it might be, that's what's going to happen. So they had been doing this for 12 years to this king Kedorlaomer. And then in the 13th year, verse 4 says they rebelled. They're like, we're done. We're tough enough. We don't want to pay these taxes. This is rightfully our stuff. So let's go. Well, Kedorlaomer goes, that's not okay. He's not the kind of guy you don't pay tribute to. And so he grabs 3 other kings that he knows and their armies. And then it's this battle with representing the rebels and the people that are like, we don't want to pay this anymore. It was 5 kings and their armies and 4 kings and their armies. They face together, 4 the conquering kings, 5 the rebels, and the rebels lose terribly. They get obliterated, right? And they get, everything is taken away. They get plundered. They're slaves, the whole thing. It's like, hey, you don't get to pay tribute anymore. We own you. They take them away. The reason that we have a record of this story in the Bible is verse 12. If you look in verse 12, here's the whole reason we know it. It says, they also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. So this is Abraham is his nephew Lot, who we read about in chapter 12 and 13, and he's living in Sodom, and he gets taken as a captive. What does Abraham do? Look at verses 13 through 16. And then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner. And these were allies of Abram. And when Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken, he led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. And then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the woman and the people. So remember, 5 kings and all their armies got defeated by these 4 kings and their armies. And then Abram, who's not a king, and his household, represents a couple hundred people, comes and goes to beat these people. Like, this is mindless, this is unheard of. Like, this would be like, let's say America, the U.S., God forbid, gets in a war. We get conquered by some other countries, and a dude named Abe from Canada is like, I got some nephews and some cousins and a BB gun, and goes and beats the people that beat us. Like, that's what happened. Like, the U.S. military spends $820 billion a year on our military, and this dude from Canada with his BB gun and his cousin Gus beat them. Like, that would be mind-blowing, and like, that's what's happening in this story. Like, Abram defeats this army. It's wild. And everyone reading this in the original context go, how did that happen? Like, 5 kings in their actual militaries. This guy who's not a king beats them that beat them and all this thing and takes everything back. It's mind-blowing. How do they do it? Verse 20 tells us, Melchizedek says, blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. So in the very first war in history, God flexes his muscle and gives victory through this unlikely man. That's step number one. That's exegesis, right? We're kind of starting to understand what would this mean to them then? How would the context play out? Now, spiritual reflection. If Jesus were walking with us on the road to Emmaus, this is the question you ask. What would he tell you about this and how it points to him? Hey, I know you know this story really well, Genesis 14. This is how it points to me. Here's what I think. I think that Abram is a picture of Jesus, and I think Lot is a picture of us, right? So let's play with that. In chapter 13, just last week, Lot lived by sight, not by faith, right? He chose the Jordan Valley, and in the Jordan Valley, one of the cities in there was Sodom, and Sodom was known for its extreme wickedness. But remember, the Jordan Valley is a large space. There's tons of land. There's lots of cities, lots of places you can dwell. And so, but where does Lot end up? Verse 12 said, Lot was dwelling in Sodom. So he's at the epicenter of sin. And that's what sin does, by the way. It's a slow drift until we find ourselves in the place that we thought we would never be. He chose the Jordan Valley, and maybe in the beginning, he's like, I know Sodom's bad. I'm not going to end up there. I know I'm surrounded by sin, so I'm going to stay away. But eventually, he drifts and floats to Sodom, and that's where he's captured. Now, if you're Abram, and you know your nephew Lot gets, he ended up where he shouldn't have ended up, and he gets captured. Now he's a slave somewhere else. What would you think? For me, I'm thinking, number one, dude, Lot, you know better. Like, you shouldn't have been there. And look what happened to you. Like, you know what? You made your bed. Now you're going to sleep in it. Like, this is how it goes. And so it's like, maybe this is God disciplining you, showing you a lesson, right? Whatever that is. Oh, also, even if I wanted to save you, I can't save you. I'm a random dude, and I don't have an army. I've got a couple hundred guys that work, with me and around and stuff like that, but I can't beat the guys that conquered all this land and conquered all these other kingdoms. Like, there's no way. And yet, despite all those reasons, Abram leaves, and he goes and he fights this battle, and he rescues Lot. And isn't that a picture of Jesus, right? He looks down, and before Jesus, every single one of us were smack dab in the middle of Sodom. We were in places we thought we'd never be, doing things we promised we'd never do, and we're just like, how did I get to this place? And he sees us in that, and rather than going, hey, you guys knew better. You know what? You made your bed, you're going to sleep in it. He goes, I'm going to come down, and I'm going to rescue you. And I love that Lot is not impressive in any way in this story. He didn't help out. He didn't merit their response. He didn't even send a help letter. Like, God in his grace intervened through Abram, and Abram goes and rescues him, right? That's the story of the gospel for us. We did nothing other than get ourselves in captivity and slavery, and Jesus leaves everything to come to us. And he knew that he would, Abram's heroic. He wins the battle. On the cross, Jesus dies, loses that sense so that he can actually win the grand battle over your soul. And so the first war, the loss, the captivity, Abram's rescuing Lot, all of it is a preview picture of the gospel story that we'll later see through the Bible, right? So that's the rescue. The second part of this story is the resemblance, right? So look at verses 17 through 20. This is the next part. So he comes back, brings everything back, and it says in verse 17, after his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who are with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Sheva, that's the king's valley, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. So the resemblance. Melchizedek is one of the most interesting and mysterious people in the whole Bible. Guys, people geek out on this guy. Like, it's like, what's going on? And this is the only historical account of him. These little tiny verses in here and this like kind of abstract, ambiguous story. And yet, in Psalm 101, verse 4, David mentions Melchizedek. And it's the messianic promise. And then in Hebrews 5 and 7, the writer of Hebrews goes into extent about Melchizedek. And so here's what happens. Abram gets done defeating all the kings, rescuing everything back, and he comes back and he brings all this stuff. And when he's in this valley, he meets the king of Salem and the king of Sodom. And the king of Salem is Melchizedek, and he brings Abram bread and wine, and he blesses him. And then Abram responds by giving him a tenth of everything he plundered, like kind of a wild story, right? Super generous. First mention of like a tithe or a tenth in the Bible too. That's all we get. That's literally all we know. And then yet Hebrews chapter 7, verse 3 says that Melchizedek resembles the Son of God. So that's like, it says, hey, this little guy that's like, whoa, I wouldn't even like come back. I wouldn't even remember his name unless something else referenced him. But Hebrews 7 verse 3 says he resembles the Son of God. How does he resemble him? When I think about resembling, I naturally think of physical resemblance, right? You think of someone looks like someone else, a doppelganger, a parent or something like that. This is Jeremy, our worship director, and his daughter, Eliana. Tell me that she doesn't resemble him. Like if you just went, cover up her face, and this guy's gonna have a kid, what's it gonna look like? This cutest little girl. By God's grace, Jeremy's wife, Jenny, is beautiful, and she got that. But like, just like him, like I'm like, that is, and then if you covered his face and went, hey, who do you think this daughter is? You'd be like, that's the guy that leads us in singing. That's Jeremy's daughter, right? And then this is the next one. This is Bob Walls. He's been served as an elder here at Citylight. This is Bob. This is a guy named J.K. Simmons. And like, people have literally walked up to him, complete strangers, going, are you a long-lost twin? Or like, what's going on? So that's Bob and JK, right? So there's a physical resemblance. And then you also just have, a personality resemblance. Like you can just resemble somebody in the way that you are. Like I love my dad. My dad and I look a lot alike. If you know my dad, you know we're really close. And I feel like I have more of a personality resemblance to my dad than a physical resemblance. Like the way we talk, the way we tell stories, the way we move our hands, walk, everything like that. I just am so similar in resembling my dad. So here's my question. If we put Melchizedek on one side of the screen and Jesus on the other side of the screen, what would the resemblance be? Like, why would the writer of Hebrews say that he resembles the Son of God? He resembles Jesus. What do they have in common? There's 4 things that we'll draw out from this passage. Number 1 is that this is how he resembles him. Number 1, he's the king of Salem, okay? Now, Salem, that word actually means peace. And so Melchizedek is literally the king of peace. But Salem would eventually become Jerusalem, right? Psalm 76, David mentions that. It calls it Salem, but it would eventually become Jerusalem. And that's the capital city of the Jews. Do you remember what was inscribed above Jesus' cross, above him? The King of the Jews, right? In other words, the King of Jerusalem, right? So in some ways, there's this connection between the King of the original Jerusalem and then Jesus, the King of the Jews, and this kind of connection. But also, Jesus is actually the King of peace. Not just Salem, the place, but Salem, the idea of peace. In Romans 5, verse 1, it says that we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. So just so you know, our lives before Jesus are marked by hostility. From us toward God and from God toward us. We don't want anything to do with God. We don't want to honor him. We want to rebel against him. And because of that sin, he now has hostility towards us. He has wrath that would burn towards sinners like me and you. This is before Jesus. And our morality, our merit, our resolutions, our best attempts could not produce the peace that we needed before God. We couldn't make that up, right? And so Jesus comes. He takes all of our sin, satisfies the wrath of God, and now we have peace with the Father through Jesus. And this perfect relationship that we have with God that's marked by peace hinges solely and completely on Jesus paying the penalty for our sin. So Melchizedek, he may have been the king of peace, but Jesus is the king who brings peace. Does that make sense? It's the first resemblance. Here's the second one. He's the king of righteousness. He's the king of righteousness. And so the name Melchizedek, it literally means the king of righteousness. And this must have been true of Melchizedek. Like this must be marking of his life. He was full of virtue and righteousness, and he was a moral, good, upstanding man. It's also true of Jesus, right? He was perfectly righteous. But the difference is he gives us that righteousness. He's not just righteous, but he imputes his righteousness on me and you. This is how 2 Corinthians 5:21 says it. For our sake, he made him who knew no sin to be sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So 2 parts. He made him to be sin who knew no sin. That's saying that Jesus had no sin. He was perfect. He was righteous. That's great. That's a crucial piece. And then subsequently, in him we might become the righteousness of God. That means that his righteousness that he possessed actually gets transferred to you and me through faith in Jesus, that we get treated as if we've never done anything wrong and we've always done everything right. And notice that he doesn't just say that we have this righteousness, like it's something that we possess. He says that we become this righteousness. It's just who we are. And it's talking about this vertical, like imputed righteousness that we get. Melchizedek may have been the king of righteousness, but Jesus is the king who gives us and makes us righteous. Number 3, this is a big one. He's king and priest. This is important. And the exegesis part of it, what's this mean? This is a really important piece. Let's understand what it meant for them then. This is the first mention of priest in the Bible, first time it ever comes up. What's interesting, though, is that the priesthood wouldn't be set up for another 500 years in Exodus 28. So for 500 years, it'd be like, oh, here's this priest. And for 500 years, in a bunch of chapters of your Bible, you're not going to hear of another priest. Like, that doesn't happen. And then God finally sets it up through the line of Aaron. And a priest's job is running, well, what is a priest? Again, you wouldn't know just from reading this passage, but the way that God has priests work is they're mediators between God and people and God. They perform sacrifices to pay for people's sin. That was kind of the idea, the way that it was set up originally. And so that's what's happening. And Jesus not only is our priest, where he's kind of that mediator between us and God, but he's not a priest in the sense that he's bringing sacrifices for us. He actually becomes the sacrifice for us. A once and for all sacrifice paid one time. Jesus is that and becomes that for you and me. So he's the priest, right? Not just making sacrifices, but becoming sacrifice. And then he says he's also king, which is Melchizedek is a king and a priest. Why is that unique here? Because the way God set up the priesthood, you could not be priest and king. You could be a priest if you were in the line of Aaron, or you could be a king, but you could never be both at the same time. So that's the way it works, right? And it's a balance of power. Think of like, you can't be a senator and a House of Representatives. Like it doesn't, you can only be one or the other. If you were both sitting in both seats, you'd have too much power. It's the same thing with priest and king, and yet Melchizedek was both. He was a priest and his king. The only other person to be both is Jesus. He's a priest in his sacrifice for us, and he's a king in his leadership for us, right? And the last resemblance that they have is that he gives bread and wine. And I love this. It's simple, but it's beautiful. Is Melchizedek, after Abram comes back, he brings out bread and wine in verse 18. And it was a meal to bless him. And you can't help but think of Matthew 26, right? And the Lord's, like the Last Supper. Jesus, sits down with his people, with his disciples. He grabs some bread, he breaks it. He says, hey, this represents my body, that it's going to be broken for you. He fills up the cups with wine, passes it, and says, hey, this represents my blood that's going to be shed for you, right? It's this beautiful picture that we celebrate in communion that we'll get to celebrate today too together. But it's this idea is that Melchizedek comes, brings bread and wine. It's a great gesture to this other person. Jesus brings a better bread and wine, his own body and his own blood shed for me and you so that we might have eternal life. So that's the resemblance, right? And the last part of this story is the refusal. This is how it ends. Verse 21 through 24. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I've lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I wouldn't take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that's yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I'll take nothing but what the young men have eaten and the share of men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. So verse 16 said that Abram beat the kings, and he brings everything back that they had taken, the people, possessions, all of it. And he meets these two kings in the valley. The picture that I think this paints is Abram walks in like a dog to this valley. He's like this, and everyone's behind him, like all the people, all the possessions, and he's like, yeah, like this happened, right? This is amazing. And the kings are like, wow. And then he looks to the king of Salem, and he's like, hey, here's a blessing, here's some bread and some wine. Great, thank you. And the king of Sodom's looking at like this interaction, and then Abram goes, hey, a tenth of all that we have here, this is yours. And the king of Sodom's like, whoa, this is crazy. Let me jump in. Hey, I'll tell you what, you can keep all our possessions. Everything that was plundered, you can have it all. I just want the people, right? And the first instinct when you read that, again, impressionistic, is like, that sounds pretty awesome. Like Abram risked his life to rescue all these people. It makes sense that he would walk away with something good. But he refuses it. He goes, I swore to God that I wasn't going to take anything of yours. I don't want you to be able to say I made him rich or whatever that is. Now, there's a lot that I could draw out here. We have a little bit of time, so I'll point this out. Again, historically, because Abram rescued everybody, in the context, those people wouldn't technically belong to anywhere. They were slaves. They got rescued. In some senses, they would belong to Abram. But notice what the king says. Hey, I just want the people, but you take the possessions. And scholars believe that when these people were rescued by Abram, they would have seen the hand of God in a really significant way. They're like, we got plundered, we lost, we're taken away. And they see Abram and this small little army defeat everybody. And they're going, how did this happen? He goes, the one true God, the God Most High, like Yahweh. And then scholars believe that many people actually came to know God through this story and this interaction, that were part of Sodom and all these other places, and these kingdoms had a chance to know God. And Abram knows, well, gosh, if I take the possessions and I give him all the people, well, then they're going to go right back in the middle of slavery and worshiping other gods and everything. And so it's in this wild sense of sacrifice. He goes, I don't want any of it. I swear to God, I wouldn't take any of it. And then because of that, these people get the chance to choose where they would want to go. They want to follow Abram and learn about God and Yahweh, or they want to go back to their cities and whatever. They get the choice. And again, that's exegesis, that's understanding it. Well, theological reflection, what's this mean? You can't help but think of Matthew chapter 4, where Satan, the devil is this kind of picture of the king of Sodom, comes and tempts Jesus. And what's he say? His last temptation brings us, hey, let me show you all these kingdoms. You can have all of it, everything in here, it's easy. But the caveat is, but I get all the people. They're not going to worship you. They're not going to be in eternity with the Father. And it's this trade-off, and Jesus goes, no, get away from me, right? And so you think like Abram is this another picture of Jesus in this story where he refuses it to say yes to the people and bring us and his family forever. So all of that, right? What does this mean to them then? How does it point to Jesus? Now we get to that space of application. And I want to say this. If you're asking, how does this, play into us now? This is a spiritual book. Like, this isn't like any other book you've read, and this book works on you. Martin Luther, the father of the Reformation, said, the Bible is alive. It speaks to me. It has feet. It runs after me. It has hands. It lays hold on me. I love that, right? Hebrews 4 says the Bible is living and active. So I just want you to know, after reading this, after doing the work of exegesis and theological reflection, there's a sense where you should just let it sit in. Like, open your hands, close your eyes, and ask the Father, what do you want me to know from this? Like, Spirit, press into my heart what I should take away and how I should apply. I'm always interested when people, after, oh, that was a great sermon, what'd you take away? And then they'll say something, and I'll ask another person, oh, that was a great sermon, what'd you take away? And they'll say that, and I'm going, wait, I just got 8 different applications in what you took away from it, and that's because the Spirit of God is personally on every single one of you. I'm one man speaking about the Bible to you, but the Spirit is uniquely encouraging you and speaking into every single person in this room in a different way if you know Jesus. And so I'm like, I just want you to know the application is pretty open-ended. There are some things that generally are true and applying, like, yeah, there's some things you should take away from this, but also the Spirit wants to speak to you uniquely. And he's spoken to me in different ways through the same text over and over in the last, 10, 15 years of walking with him. So just to encourage you to do that, to slow down in that space. 2 last things. William Tyndale is the pioneer who risked his life to translate the Bible in English. He's one of the reasons that we have the Bible in our hands and can read it. He was the first person to translate the New Testament to English, and he would have finished the Old Testament. He got most of the way done, but he was burned at the stake because the Catholic Church didn't want the Bible in English. They feared that common people reading the Bible would lead to heresy, and so they wanted to guard that. Here's what Tyndale said about the Bible. He said, I defy the Pope and all his laws, and if God spares my life for many years, I will cause the boy that drives the plow to know more of the Scripture than the Pope does. God has given us the Bible to know it and subsequently to know him. And people have given their lives so that we have the Bible. I don't know about you, but I don't want this thing to sit on my shelf and collect dust. And I don't want to leave a lot of meat left on the bone of this either. I want to get everything God intends. I'll finish with this. If you know me and my dad, we have a close relationship. He's one of my best friends. I love him so much. But imagine, 33 years ago when my mom found out she was pregnant, that my dad also found out that he has a terminal illness, that he would die before I was born. And so for the next few months, he just writes these letters every single day. Austin, I love you. This is what I think about you. This is what I'm excited for you. This is what my plans I have for you. This is my life. This is what I've been through. This is what shaped me. This is what I hope is true of you in all these letters. And then, he dies and I'm born and I don't get to see him. But on my 13th birthday, my mom says, I have a gift for you. And she pulls out these letters. And she says, these are letters from your dad that he wrote for you before you were born. I know you've never met him, but you can know him through these letters. How do you think I would treat those letters? They'd be everything to me, right? I'd read them every single day. There's the way that I could know my dad, although I can't actually hear from him. And these are everything. And I'm going, that's what the Bible is. And that's what God has given us through his word. The one thing that we have objectively to know God, like here. And so I'm just thinking we should be people who love this, right? So that's my prayer. That's my hope. Let's pray.